Hello, everyone. I'll just try to share my presentation. So here we are. So I have chosen to speak on this unpublished small sutra text of the 19th century called the Svātantraydīpikā by Manasārām Monga. So I was introduced to this text by my teacher, Pandit Dinanath when I was small. I was very young, and he had prepared a transcript of this text, focusing only on one manuscript that he had in his personal collection. That's with me now. So I'll show you also a sample of that manuscript. And he was aware of only one manuscript from Jammu collection, the temple library, famous Raghunath temple library. And he wanted to collate also that Jammu manuscript. However, in all these years now, I have been able to collect, I think, almost 4 more manuscripts, which are more reliable also at the same time. And I'm now planning to prepare a critical edition of this text. I have already typesetted it. I have identified the quotations and here and there tried to understand the text. I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. So I'll just share some ideas about the text with you. So the author of this text is mentioned as Pandit Manasārām Monga, who is also known sometimes as Mankāk Monga, Mansa Razdan. Nothing much is known about him apart from the fact that I know in the Kashmir Śaiva Darshan Brihad Kosha Baljinath Pandit mentions that he probably wrote this text in the reign of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and Maharaja Ranjit Singh was in reign from 1801 to 1839. So would have been roughly his time period of Pandit Manasārām Monga. And he's also reported as a grandson of the famous Kashmirian commentator Bhāskarakaṇṭha. Famously also through anecdotes and many hearsays, I hear that he was also a teacher of Pandit Rām Joo, who lived from 1853 to 1915, and who was famously the grand teacher of Swami Lakshman Joo. That's all we know about the author. Nothing much precisely is known as far as at present, as far as I know. Now, talking about the sutra texts in particular, I think I had mentioned in my abstract that this is probably one of the first sutra texts after Śivasūtra in roughly 9th century, but that's not completely true, because then I thought and looked around, and of course I was already aware of some of these, like we have 12th century Vatulanath Sutra, we have Chumma Samketa Prakash of Nishkriyanandanatha. Sometimes it's only called the Chumma Samketa, Chumma Sampradaya, and it's not always clear whether the commentary was also written by Nishkriyanandanatha, and so on and so forth. Then we have Kula Sutra by Shrutikantha. Now, Vatulanath Sutra is published in Kashmir Sanskrit series. Śivasūtra also, as you know, of Vasugupta in several, at least 2 editions, it's published with Vimarshini of Kshema Raja in KSTS. Chumma Samketa Prakasha and Kula Sutra, they are both published as appendix in Navajivan Rastogi's book, this Hindi book, Kashmir Ki Shaiva Sanskriti Mein Kula or Krama Mata. They're both published in there as appendix, only the text without translation. And of course, I'm not going into the manuscript details, where can one find the manuscripts of these texts, but they are in the sutra form. So that's what I want to kind of point out here particularly. Now, this is the schema of the chapters of the Śivasūtras. And these Shivasūtras are famously the sūtras of Vasugupta, for instance, as we know. And the earlier commentator we have is Bhāskarakaṇṭha, imagining he is the one who has given this chapter scheme to the whole text, as we know from the KSTS. So we have these three prakashas, and the titles of three chapters are named as Samanya Chit Prakasha Swarupa Nirupana, which has 23 sutras, and Sahaja Vidyodaya, 10 sutras, and Vibhuti Spanda, 45 sutras. Now, this is more or less the scheme that is also followed later in the Spandakarikas, because Spandakarika is understood as a kind of commentary on Shivasūtras by either Kallata or, Kallata himself wrote also the Vritti, we know that. So it's always, as we know, it's always very difficult to understand this schema of chapterization in earlier texts, whether because the kind of manuscripts we have, whether they are done by the scribes or the editors or the original authors or the commentators and so on and so forth. So more or less the schema we find in this Vartika of Bhaskara, of the Shivasūtras, is that we have these three chapters. Allegedly, also Bhaskara also talks of this one fourth chapter, Tattvartha Chintamani, and ascribes it to Kallata, which is supposed to have been lost, but he does mention it. And there are a number of quotations in a lot of texts, including Vivritti Vimarshani of Abhinava or Vimarshani of Abhinava, or I think Shivasūtra Vimarsha, Kshemaraja himself also refers to this text, and he says that Yatha Kallatapadai Uktam Tattvartha Chintamanau, and so on and so forth. So he, it's clear that this was a text, and it's clear also from the quotation in the beginning, from this verse, that Bhaskara tells us that there was supposed to be a fourth chapter, which is lost to us. Now, if we see later Kallata's Vritti, you can see that, it is just straightforwardly kind of focusing on the chapterization of how Bhaskara had chaptered, even the names, Swarupa Spanda, Sahaja Vidyodaya, and Vibhuti Spanda, and so on and so forth, the kind of chapterization. It's also, as we know, it's complicated from one point of view, because if you see the chapterization later of Shivasūtras in Kshemaraja's Vimarshini, for instance, this is the Nirnaya, Spandakarika Nirnaya of Kshemaraja, where he, for instance, has this three main chapters, but he also seems to have these, at least the one verse of the last Nishyanda. He has one verse there. The last verse, I'm not sure about whether it's by Kshemaraja himself. Probably yes, but it's always dubious, this schema that authors and commentators have of these chapters. But I wanted to refer particularly, for instance, to Shivasūtra Vimarshani of Kshemaraja, where it becomes very clear that he had this scheme of chapterization where he wanted to appropriate it according to the Trika system that he himself was an author of. So you can see, for instance, earlier Bhaskara, when he writes Vritti on Shivasūtras, he has the names of the chapters. Those seem to be adopted also by Kshemaraja himself in his Nirnaya on Spanda Nirnaya, for instance. But when it comes to Shivasūtra Vimarshani, he is appropriating the three chapters according to the three schema of the upayas famous in Trika. So he would very clearly say in the beginning of the chapter itself that the text is going to be talking about Shambhavopaya. So we have the three Unmeshas. We have the Shambhavopaya Prakashana, we have Shaktopaya Prakashana, and Anavopaya Prakashana. And respectively, we have 22, 10, and 45 sutras in all three of them. Now, why this becomes important vis-a-vis the sutra text that I'm talking about is that I'm wanting to understand whether, for instance, our author, Manasārām Monga, had any inclinations of creating the structure of his sutra text around, for instance, the scheme that was followed by, let's say, Kshemaraja or Bhaskara, for instance. You will see, I think, that the Svātantraydīpikā, this chapter scheme is that he has 4 chapters there, and roughly, not roughly exactly 72 in all the manuscripts, all 6 manuscripts I have seen, 72 sutras. So the first chapter would be known as Parameshwara Vibhuti Sphara Tat Samaveshopaya Kathanam, a slightly longer title for a chapter. 36 sutras, the largest one, the biggest one. Ullāsa 2 is Parashakti Samavesha, 16 sutras, and then Jivan Mukta, not Jivan Mukti, but Jivan Mukta Swarupa Nirupanam, 10 sutras, and the last he has Swatantra Shakti Uchchalanam, 10 sutras. So that makes it 72. So when I think of this scheme, and also, of course, I'm still trying to kind of put the text together, trying to understand, edit, and do other things with the text or translation eventually. But then if I think of the scheme that, okay, it looks like, yes, Parameshwara Vibhuti Sphara. So, okay, he's talking about, you can say roughly, if it can be, synonymized with Shambhavopaya, and then we have or Shiva or Pati and so on and so forth, that scheme, or Parashakti as in the Shaktopaya, and then Jivan Mukta as in one who is aspiring for Jivan Mukti. I imagine that's the idea, is the Anu, as in the Anava Upaya. And then we have the 4th Ullāsa, that's talking about the Swatantra Shakti, as in the Vimarsha Shakti, for instance, which is what is aspired by the limited being. But yet, even if that roughly seems to be the schema of Manasārām Monga, it's almost the same case with Kshemaraja, that when Kshemaraja talks about these 3 upayas to be 3 chapters, it's hard to understand. For instance, there are some sutras in first chapter which you are like, okay, wait, I mean, how do these sutras, for instance, mantra idea falling in the Shambhavopaya, and then you're like, okay, wait, how does this fit in here? So I think that is kind of a problem with Kshemaraja's, at least for us, if not for him, but at least for us, when we try to make an attempt to understand the ideas. So you try to understand, and it becomes not very clear always that why, if you're strictly trying to have this first chapter as Shambhavopaya, why is there this overlapping of the kind of sutras from one chapter to another, and so on and so forth. At least we think that. Now that's the same idea when I read this text. I'm seeing it, the scheme of the sutras, and I'm like, okay, wait, how is it that this sutra fits in here, this sutra fits in? That's not the case, of course, with every chapter, every sutra, but more or less, that's something I don't see the logic of having XYZ sutra in the first chapter, which is talking about the Parameshwara Vibhuti Sphara, understanding probably the idea, but more or less it may fit the idea. So that logic of the sutras in certain chapters, chapterization. But in this case, at least, I can say in this case of now that I have seen all its available manuscripts, possibly, I don't know if one of them was written by himself or something, it's possible. After all, he was just the 19th-century scholar, person, or Pandit. And it's possible one of those older paper-written manuscripts is just his own handwriting, the whole orthography. But I wouldn't know that, from possibly any source. Now you can also see what I think my intention initially was also that to try and understand if there in the whole text there is something. It is very clear to me that it's a kind of, let's say, Trika text, Śaiva Trika text, and that's what overall scheme, that what he's trying to establish the idea, principle of Prakasha and Vimarsha, the unitariness of the multiplicity. Those ideas are manifesting very clearly. in the beginning of the text, he seems to have a discourse with the Sankhya-vadins. So all the sutras also contain vritti. Sometimes it's little longer, but mostly it is shorter vritti. And in the beginning of those sutras, in the vritti, he seems to be picking up at least first 5 to 7 sutras. He seems to be picking up Sankhya-vadins as the opponents and trying to have a discourse with them. Of course, that's understood that they are the Dvaitins, so they are the kind of obvious opponents, and trying to establish the idea harmony of Shiva and Shakti vis-a-vis the Prakriti and Purusha duality idea. But as the text moves on towards even the end, I do not see from a very Shastric point of view or a very creative philosophical point of view that, okay, there is something groundbreaking, new idea coming up. It's a text which is reflecting on these ideas again. Sutras are rather more, I would say, creative attempt on part of the author rather than the vritti. Vritti is just trying to kind of contextualize them, the sutras, or trying to interpret the idea in there. But in none of the vritti contexts do I come across anything deviant philosophically from the main Trika point of view. So these are some of the, for instance, not some of the, actually all of the texts that I saw have been quoted. I think a couple of them still I'm struggling with. I couldn't understand where the source. There were a couple of verses which I didn't understand or even couldn't search that where they're from. But I'm still, as I said, it's the work in progress. So I'm still trying to locate them in e-texts. But you can see, I did observe heavy presence of, for instance, quotations from Bhagavad Gita. That by 19th century is not very surprising. There is Vijnana Bhairava, there is Mokshopaya is very often as Vasishthe or Moksho. He doesn't use the term Mokshopaya, but he uses the term, I think, mostly the Yatha Vasishthe. Yeah, and that's mostly it in terms of the quotations. Just to briefly now share with you the kind of edition I'm working on the basis of these 6 manuscripts, as you can see. So 3 of them are from Jammu. One is from Kulgam. Kulgam is a small district in a small place in Kashmir, and a couple of them from Srinagar. So you can see 5 of them are in Sharada and 1 of them is in Devanagari. And that's the Kashmirian Devanagari manuscript I was talking about in the beginning, that Pandit Manasārām wanted also to collate, and he did. And this is the abbreviation. You have J1 and J2. These are my siglars from Ranbir Sanskrit Research Library, Jammu. One is catalogued, one is not catalogued. And Kendriya Sanskrit Vidyapita in Jammu, that is the J3. The third one, DNY, is from the personal collection of Pandit Manasārām. This manuscript is with me now. One is in Pratap Singh Public Library from Srinagar, and then again another one in a personal collection from Dr. Manzoor Ahmad Yaripora. So you can see, just to give briefly an idea about, this is the Kashmirian Devanagari manuscript in the Ranbir Research Library. And it's a smaller text, and as you can see, the lines and the orthography is also bigger. So almost all the leaves or folios have just 4 lines. And there are some mistakes in this manuscript, as we have found usually in these Kashmirian Devanagari manuscripts, which were copied usually from the Sharada manuscripts, and that was usually the case, which we find in the Jammu Temple Library. And this manuscript is also mentioned in the catalogue, as I have mentioned in the bibliography part down there. This one is uncatalogued. This is a Sharada manuscript. This is a multiple text manuscript. It has many other, the manuscript begins with, I think, if I'm not wrong, yeah, it was this one that Okay, no. The Svātantraydīpikā is the second one. So we have first the Sri Kularnava, as you can see from the slide. And then there is Svātantraydīpikā, and then Panchastavi, and so on and so forth, other texts. So it's a multiple text composite manuscript. Mostly it's correct. I haven't come across any major, so it also looks like Manasārām Monga, of course, seems to be he's well-trained Sanskritist, because you don't find usually in at least the Sharada manuscript, which according to me are a little older, I don't find Sanskrit mistakes in them, many of them. If they're orthographical mistakes, obvious corrections, and that's a different thing, those could be scribal errors or something. This is another one from the Kendriya Sanskrit Vidyapita in Jammu. It's again uncatalogued. And Sharada, you can see it's not very old. The paper is also not very old. And it's probably written with kind of a modern ink on sort of modern paper. Not very old paper. This one is from the private collection of Dr. Mansoor Ahmad Yaripora. And this is also a multiple text manuscript. This one begins with, that's why I was getting confused. This one has almost 13 titles. And this one begins with the Svātantraydīpikā, and it has other sūtras and small texts and so on and so forth. And then we have the Shah one from Pratap Singh Public Library. It's also uncatalogued. This seems to be a little older. I mean, as far as orthography is also concerned, and the paper probably also. You can see here, if I'm not able to point out the cursor here, but you can see down there in the manuscript, for instance, there is a bold projected small text down there, Swatantraha Parameshwaraha, this being the first sūtra of the first ullāsa in this text. And this one is from the private collection of Pandit Dinanath. And this manuscript has actually first, I think, couple of pages, almost one folio, which is missing, or which was, I mean, it's not there. The one I have from him is just the first page is not there. And this is also, I think, one of the older manuscripts that was from his personal collection and is now with me. But I still mentioned it as private collection of Pandit Dinanath. And then this is the transcript actually, which he had made. And so this is the handwriting of Pandit Dinanath, and he had made a transcript using this manuscript. Actually, this was the principal manuscript he used, and he created this transcript out of this. And then he wanted to collate this transcript with the Devanagari, the only Devanagari manuscript that I showed you in the beginning of these. And he has done that, I can see from the transcript. This notebook, it's an old notebook that he had given me. Unfortunately, he was not able to publish it himself, but he gave it to me and it remained with me. And then over a period of time, I collected, as I said, 4 more manuscripts. And now I can see there is a possibility of creating a better edition. And I'm aware of at least 2 more manuscripts with 2 more individuals in Delhi, but it has been hard to catch hold of them from their personal collection and so on and so forth. So yeah, let's hope I will be able to have at least photocopies or some kind of maybe images of them, so that it's helpful to, create a better critical text, at least to consult them. They may be more helpful, who knows. Just one point that in this transcript that I have from Pandit Dinanath, interestingly, he has this another, in the same notebook, Jnana Kriya Dvaya Shataka, which is anonymous, and he has transcribed that also completely. And this is a longer stotra of almost, I think, 110 verses, 109 verses, which is also published as a part of Professor Navajivan Rastogi's book that I mentioned. Yeah, that was just a footnote, a passing comment. And this is the edition. I mean, it's still kind of very, very preliminary. But this is basically my attempt of creating the critical edition. Of course, it needs a lot of work, and it's only so far kind of a diplomatic edition I have. But I'm sure in sooner or later, depending on how things work, I'll be able to have a full-fledged edition with a translation and study of this text. So that's what it was, just a small presentation on this text, which is unpublished, but yeah, from that point of view, important, one more addition to scholarship. But from another point of view, like for instance, if giving an example why I had become interested in this, because giving an example, when you read the commentary, the Vartikas on Śivasūtras of Bhāskara, and when you compare that, for instance, with Kshemarāja's Vimarshini on the same sutras, you can see that large difference what Bhāskara is doing and what Kshemarāja is doing. And Kshemarāja's project is something completely different, and you can see that that's a staunch Shastran writing that commentary, appropriating the sutras into this Trika fold, which is very clear, very straightforward, and and sort of an embedded attempt being made by a Shastran to, as you know, he does in Swachanda and Netra and so on and so forth. Bhaskara's commentary in Vartika form reads more like a sort of a very straightforward exposition. I mean, you can see that he's also struggling with ideas, but his is not an attempt, a shastric attempt from one point of view. It's not always very clear what sources he's using, or what sources he had access to, or something that is difficult to understand. But from that point of view, Kshemarāja's commentary is very clearly an appropriation from one point of view. He's, he's in a sense converting the text into a fold, which already sutra text is a Trika text from Vasugupta. But he's structuring it, he's following the doctrines, as you can see, following the scheme, particularly of the chapters. So I would see that as a creative attempt on part of Kshemarāja, which is what I wanted to see here in this text, that is there anything or something in this text emerging as sort of a completely new point, even if it is just on few sutras or something. As I said, sutras are more creative than the vritti itself. But it's possible that in further readings, as I go ahead and read the text again and again, maybe some things I haven't reflected upon carefully or clearly, in future they'll become clear. That's also possible. So with that, thank you very much for listening to the short presentation. I hope we can have discussion about this if possible. So thank you very much, and bye-bye.